Good evening. I'm Howard Kine, president of Hesston College, and we extend a welcome to all students, faculty, and staff, all residents of Hesston and surrounding communities. A special welcome to the Mound Ridge High School Senior English class and the Newton Public Library Book Club, residents of Showalter Villa and Kidron Bethel Retirement Centers. Tonight, we especially welcome groups that have partnered with us in a significant way for this event. These include the Hesston Public Library, Newton Public Library, Mound Ridge High School, Hesston Women's Civic Club, and area churches. The reception following will feature food from Salted Creamery and coffee from Lincoln Perk, as well as information booths by CASA, A Voice for Children, ICT SOS, Heart to Heart, and St. Francis Community Services. And through a grant by South Central Kansas Library Services, the Hesston Public Library passed out over 125 books free to members of the community. Each year, the Hesston College First Year Experience leads the entire campus in focusing on a topic that has global implications. In this experience, we face hard realities that present us with adaptive challenges as well as the opportunity to make the world a better place. A special thanks to Marissa King and Russ Gaddert, who are leading the seminar this year along with other faculty and our first year experience scholars. Our common community read this year is Etched in Sand, and we will be honored to hear from the author Regina Calcaterra later in the program. Please join me in an invocation prayer. Lord, we ask that you would open our minds and hearts to the word you have for us this evening. We thank you for the gifts of music and story that inform and move us. Speak to us, we pray. In the name of Jesus, the source of our strength, we pray. Amen.
Music is an important part of our community, and we're delighted to be able to share in the opening of this service a lullaby. This piece is called The Seal Lullaby, and I was very touched as a father reading this book of Regina's dedication to her siblings and the environment that she created for them. And the end of this poem is, "The storm shall not wake thee, nor shark overtake thee, asleep in the arms of the slow swinging seas." There were many times as I was reading this book that I had to just kind of stop and take things in and just reflect on what I was reading. And you have an opportunity to do that at the end of this piece, which is just a lullaby that we will hum. And so we offer this to you as a gift, and thank you so much for coming to our campus.
Good evening. My name is Libby Albers, and I represent the Hesston Public Library portion of the Community Read. We are so grateful that the campus expanded its read to the entire community to be a part of this collective conversation. We've often heard the African proverb, "It takes a village to raise a child." What kind of a village? What kind of a village has the courage and the kindness to be informed enough to raise a child? A village that perhaps is brave enough to read a book that won't be a gentle read. To some, the Hesston community's read of Etched in Sand exposed an unfathomable childhood. To others, the story was too familiar, too difficult, not yet resolved. To all that have joined in this collective read, thank you. And to those who, after tonight, have the courage to keep inspiring and the kindness to keep serving, you are raising the future. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Daisy Correa and I'm from Southern California and I'm a social work major.
And my name is Jessica Farrant-Lold. I'm from here in Kansas and I'm a psychology major. And we have the pleasure of introducing to you Regina Calcaterra, the author of our community read. Written in 2013, Etched in Sand is a New York Times bestseller and has been integrated into many college, high school, and middle school curriculum. We're especially excited to announce that HarperCollins, who published Etched in Sand, recently announced that Regina is working on her second book, which will be about her younger sister, Rosie.
Although Etched in Sand tells the story of Regina's childhood, as an adult, Regina has used her law degree in roles such as Chief Deputy to the Suffolk County Executive, a partner to Barracks, Rodos, and Basing, and as an Executive Director of 2 New York State Commissions. Regina is presently an attorney working for the state of New York and has been a champion for issues such as child abuse and neglect and the processes of adoption and foster care.
We're grateful for Regina's book, her lifetime of work, and her visit here today. This fall, we've been learning about the small acts of kindness that can make a big difference in someone's life. We hope tonight serves to inspire each of you to do the little things, the tiny acts of caring that can make a big difference. Please join us in welcoming Regina Calcaterra.
Thank you. This is an absolutely amazing turnout tonight. First, what I want to do is I just want to get a show of hands of who here has actually read Etched in Sand. Oh my goodness. This is absolutely spectacular. Thank you so much for taking the time to read Etched in Sand and to read about the messages that are in the book, which I'll share with you in a moment. But first, what I wanted to do is I have a lot of people I just want to thank. As an author, and when you write a book, you just hope that someone's going to be interested in reading it. And as I was finishing writing Etched in Sand, I recently found out that one of my sisters said, "Oh, don't worry about Regina sharing our story. No one's ever going to want to read it." That was Camille, by the way. And so let alone folks being interested in reading our story, it now has been incorporated into curriculum in high schools and colleges and middle schools, which is absolutely phenomenal. But one of the biggest honors for an author is for your book, this one book that you wrote, to be selected by a college's first year read and to be selected by a community as community read. And it's for me to be here, first of all, to find out that Hesston actually selected my book as first year, as community and first year read was an absolute honor. And for me to be here and see all of you and see that actually this amount of people showed up in the evening. I'm sure there are other things you may want to be doing. and actually read Etched in Sand. So thank you for each and every one of you here tonight for sharing in our story and being interested in sharing its messages of how acts of kindness can actually have such an impact on children in need. I first want to thank President Keim, who has been very gracious in supporting Etched in Sand and working with the college and working with the community to support all the various different programs that have occurred around it. And I also want to thank all of Hesston's administrators and faculty and students, but there's a few people I just want to specifically point out. It's Marissa King and Russ Gator, who actually head up the first year experience, and all the work that they've did and the programs that they've put together. They've taken their time and made sure that programs have been available to raise a certain level of consciousness about the issues in Etched in Sand. And in fact, recently Russ was telling me that they put together a program where they had 150 first-year experience scholars read the book, and then they went out in the community and they did certain activities, and they were, Russ and Jessica, who's one of the first-year experienced scholars, had worked to place everyone where they want to actually go work. So they actually spent a day contributing back to the community and giving a day of service, which was prompted by the themes in Etched in Sand. And I also want to take thank some fabulous students that I met tonight, and I actually met them visually a few months ago when they took a picture of Etched in Sand when my book was first announced, and they sent it out in a press release, and they were all wearing sweatshirts that said Hesston on it and were holding the book. But I had the good fortune of actually having dinner with them tonight, and they have put in a lot of energy supporting the book, and I'm just going to say everyone's first name, but they are wonderful, and to know that they are our future is sitting here right now, and that they are going to be our future going forward gives me great comfort. So I just wanted to personally thank Jessica and Luis and Carly and Germany, Adrian, and Jessica. I also wanted to thank the Hesston community and Mayor Emery, and also quite specifically Libby Albers, who heads up the library here. I've been finding out from other folks in the Hesston community about the amount of energy she's also put in around the book and partnered up with the first-year experience directors at Hesston, and it's impressive, really impressive. And they have met with social workers, they have met with foster children, they have put together programs where they have invited people to come speak, to talk about trauma, to talk about the foster care system, to talk about caseworkers, and to remind people about the impact that they could actually have. So this is a tremendous honor. You can imagine this for any author to tell their story and to actually have people read it, but then motivate an entire community into action. So thank you very much. What I would like to do tonight is, now I see that the majority of you have actually read the book, but I'm still going to tell my story from verbally, from my perspective, and kind of walk you through it and share some things that aren't necessarily shared in the book. Then after that, I'm going to tell you the 2 reasons why I wrote Etched in Sand, and then the impact the book has had, and then I'm going to open it up to questions and answers. So I was born to a mother who had 5 kids by 5 different men, and my mother was mentally ill, and she was mentally ill during a time when people really didn't necessarily seek care for their mental illness. So what she would do is she self-medicated through drugs and alcohol. So here is this woman who is drug and alcohol addicted, mentally ill, and she had 5 kids by 5 different men. She could barely take care of herself, let alone the 5 kids that she had. So what she would do is she would find us places to live, and this all happened on Long Island in the state of New York. So she would find us places to live, and sometimes they would be houses or apartments, but we would never stay there too long because ultimately we would end up evicted. Other times she would find us places to live behind a supermarket, out of a car, on the streets, in homeless shelters, and occasionally when the authorities found out how we were living, we would end up in foster homes. But when we were under her care, she would find us these places to live, and then she would just leave us there for weeks or months at a time. And we were these 5 little kids who had to figure out how we were going to survive. So one of the things that we needed to do was steal food to eat. So we always had to come up with a plan about how we were going to effectively do this so we wouldn't get caught. So one of the things that we would do is we would go into a local supermarket, And everyone had a responsibility. I mean, there was 5 of us, so we would have a decoy and we'd have a lookout, and Rosie would always end up being the decoy because she was the baby and she was cute, and so people would kind of focus on her. But we each had a role, and what my role is, I would walk into the supermarket and go to the back to go find the box boys. That's what they were called back then. Now they're called associates. So I would go find the box boys, who were the boys who they were responsible for taking the boxes that the food came in and flattening them out and putting them out back. And I would go in the back and I would tell them that we were moving, and my father told me I should come in here and ask for a few boxes before you break them up. And I would be very specific. I would tell them I would need the large egg carton boxes that carried the egg cartons in it, and I just needed 2. And I did that by design because the egg carton boxes were long, and I would always keep the flaps open so it would look like I had nothing in the top box. But they were long enough when I'd lift up the top box, what I could slip into the bottom box were things that were flat, like Jiffy muffin mix, macaroni and cheese, Egg McMuffins, powdered milk for obviously milk, so things I could kind of flatten out. Then I'd put the top box back on, and I'd walk out of the store, and it would look light, so it would look like I was just walking out with a bunch of boxes. And if we weren't using boxes, what we would sometimes try to use is our clothes. And what we were able to steal was really based upon the season. So if it was the winter time and we were wearing winter coats, we would put holes in the coat. And we'd walk into the supermarket and we'd try to put food back here because it could be hidden based on like the thickness of our coat. But if it was warmer weather out, we were concerned that anything we would put down our pants would go falling down. Down to our feet as we were walking out. So we really had to think of like other ways to kind of hide food under our undergarment. But while a few of us were doing this, one of us was always up at the register buying something with food stamps, because we still would have a few dollars in food stamps. So there were things that you really can't steal, like toilet paper. Not something easy for you to pick up and walk out. You can't hide it anywhere. It's really kind of bulky. Peanut butter, jelly. These aren't things I could hide very easily either. And sometimes a half gallon of milk. So those are the things that one of my sisters would take the food stamps and buy. So it would kind of look like we were really there to join our sister who was picking up these items to pay for food stamps, and then we'd all end up walking out together. So this is like, we had to operate as this little group and be very organized in order for us to get food. So that's one way that we did it. Another way is Long Island at that time had a lot of farmland. So we would go to farms and we'd do the belly shuffle. We were little kids, so you could get down on the floor and you could shuffle on the ground and you could pick up any vegetables that were down there, or we may have been able to pull them off the vines. And that worked fine until one of the farmers came out one day with a shotgun. And we decided we needed to change our MO. So another place we would literally go food shopping were the beaches. Back then, the beaches, on Long Island were really plentiful. I mean, you could find mussels everywhere, and you could actually go clamming with your feet, your hands in the sand, because they were plentiful as well. So we liked to go to the beaches because that's where we would get seafood, but we also liked being there because it was a place that we really felt comfortable. Because if you think about how we lived, we were these young children who didn't have a parent. We didn't have a washing machine. No one was really encouraging, us to take a bath or a shower, unless it was each other. No one really taught us how to blow our nose. We weren't stealing a toothbrush. We were stealing food. Because it wasn't necessary for us to steal a toothbrush. It wasn't something that we really needed. So we shared one toothbrush amongst the 5 of us that had really flattened bristles. So if you think about it, we didn't bathe often, we didn't wash our clothes often, maybe we were blowing our nose, and we definitely had terrible dental hygiene, and we were little kids in some very nice communities. Sometimes we'd be living in low-income communities, but other times we were living in middle-income and to higher middle-income communities as well, just there on the fringe of society where no one was really noticing us. But we were still children, and children go out and they try to find other kids to play with. And so when we would go out and play with other kids, we would hear their parents telling them to stay away from us because they would take one look at us. And so we already knew at a young age that we were being marginalized. So that's why we like going to a beach, because if you think about what a beach kind of gives to a child like this, it actually gives you an opportunity to mainstream, because you walk onto the beach, you take your clothes off, you're wearing your bathing suit, and you get in the water and you look like everyone else, except maybe we're just a little bit skinnier. So we would go in the water, and we'd play on the floating dock, and we'd play in the sand and frolic around in the water with other kids, and it was okay, and no one told us to stay away from their children. And they would do it to protect their children. They thought for some reason it wasn't good to be around us, and you know, I understand what the reaction is now. But that's why we love the beach, because we could easily just fit right in with everyone else. But besides that, we would also manage to get food. And then the other place that we would go when our mother would just leave us in these apartments and these homes and not come around for a while is we would go to school, because she would register us in school sometimes. And for us, school wasn't necessarily a place where we got an education. That wasn't our primary reason to go. We loved school, because as soon as we walked in, the administration would sign us up for free lunch. They'd take one look at us. There wasn't any question whatsoever that we were eligible for that. The second thing that a school offered, it was temperature controlled, right? Warm in the winter. That's not necessarily something that a homeless child has. It had clean running water. Again, some of these places we lived in, sometimes we didn't even live in a place. You wouldn't necessarily have any water, let alone clean running water, and it had electricity. So that's what a school provided us. It provided us a free lunch and a safe place to be. It was a safe harbor where we were able to feel comfortable. But then it was also a place that we received an education. But we weren't there often. Sometimes we were in school and sometimes we weren't, and because we had younger siblings, the older girls would have to take a day off. Every week, we'd have to switch off who was going to watch Rosie because she wasn't school age yet. So we would be in school, but when we registered, we wouldn't be there that often because of our child rearing commitments that we had. And then my mother would take us out of school because she had a lot of warrants for her arrest. And when she felt as if the authorities were closing in on her, she would remove us from the school and we'd move somewhere else. So then we had to figure out something else to do to occupy our time. And besides schools, the only other option for us were public libraries. And it was a perfect option for kids like us. So we were 5 little kids. And back then, you were easily able to walk into a public library, and you didn't need a library card. You didn't need to show proof of address, and you were able to take a book out. Or you were able to sit there and use whatever services that they had. So we would enjoy that because libraries offered the same thing the schools had, besides the free lunch. It was temperature controlled, clean water, electricity. Again, things that kids who are living on the fringe of society may not have access to. And then it was a place just for us to hang out for hours. So what we'd always do is we scoured the entire library for every highlight magazine that was there. Because the reality is that you're not going to have 5 kids who are going to sit down and start reading. That just doesn't happen in real life. So we have to figure out how it is that we're going to occupy ourselves. So we try to find all the highlight magazines because they had activities in them. We would do them. We do them for our siblings. And then some of the libraries actually had Mad Lib magazines back then, and we'd have a hoot playing with them as well. And then we'd have to get down to reading when you ran out of used up all the activity magazines. And as a young child, I remember being 7, 8 years old and being absolutely fascinated with a series of books called the Landmark series. And the Landmark series were a series of books that were published in the 1950s about historic figures. Some of them were American historic figures, and some of them were global historic figures. And I started reading about our American historic figures, mostly men, and I started getting a fascination with them because I realized these people lived during really difficult times and they achieved a lot. So then I tried to find books on women, historic books on women, and the Landmark series back then only had 3 books that were published on US-born women. One was Pocahontas, and there was Betsy Ross and Dolly Madison. So again, I started reading these books about these women who grew up during a difficult time and still went on to achieve. And after I went through those 3 books, because those are the 3 that I was really interested in reading, I needed to find another book about another woman who achieved something incredible, and that's when I came across Amelia Earhart. And once I read one book about Amelia Earhart, I couldn't stop. I wanted to read every single book I could. Because Amelia Earhart was born during a time where societal norms was dictating what her life was supposed to be like. And she pushed away those norms, and she wanted to decide what her fate was going to be. She didn't want anyone else to decide that for her. She was gutsy, and she was fearless. By the time I was 7 and 8 years old, I was already being told what my future was going to be, what societal norms are expecting of me, that I was going to be a teenage pregnant mother, that I was going to be drug and alcohol addicted, incarcerated, homeless, and I was going to abuse my kids. Because that's the kind of person that my mother was, but it wasn't the kind of person I wanted to be. But people were telling me that because that's the stereotype of people who grew up in that situation, is that they don't break the cycle. So I was reading these books about Amelia Earhart, and people were telling her what she should be doing based upon societal norms, and she refused to listen to them, and she started determining what her future was going to be. So I wasn't sitting there at 7 or 8 years old figuring out that I may have a different future, but it was a seed that was planted in my mind from a book. I thought, can I be like her? Can I somehow channel her? As a child, I remember reading this. So this is what our life was like when we were with our mother. We had to find these different ways to entertain ourselves. And then she would come home once in a while. But when she came home, it was never easy because she was horribly abusive to us. And the abuse that she inflicted upon us, at that time, I wouldn't say it was acceptable, but it was ignored. But if it happened in this day and age, she would be arrested and she would have lost custody of us. And so it was tough when we were with her, whether or not she was around or not. But then when the authorities found out how we were living, they'd pick us up. And there were 5 of us. So we'd always get placed in separate foster homes. Some of the foster homes that we were in were fantastic. They were fabulous. We were loved there, we were cared for, we were fed. We felt important, we were part of the family. But other foster homes we were in were horrible. Because back in the 70s, they really didn't do background checks on foster parents. So terrible things happened to us at the hands of these strangers. And we shared them with each other when we would get back together as a family. And we realized at a young age that we're better off being together. So here we were, these little kids, realizing that it was better for us to deal with the devil we knew, that was our mother, versus the devil we didn't know, which was the foster care system. So we made a pact that we would never tell anyone how it was that we were living. And if anyone was going to ask us where our mother was at 3 a.m, we'd say she was working at a bakery delivering bread because all the bread has to be delivered by 5 a.m., which is true because she did that once for about a week. So we knew about it. If they asked us where she was at 7 a.m., we'd say she's working at a deli, peeling potatoes and peeling carrots, preparing, the potato salad. And because she would work in a deli a bit more often, we'd go with her once in a while to help her out so we knew what she'd be doing. But we'd never know where the deli was that she was working. We would just say she's working in a deli. If we were asked where she was during the day, we said she was a real estate agent because she did that once as well. And if we were asked where she was at nighttime, we said that she was a barmaid. So we had an answer for everything because we knew that if we didn't stick together and have the same story, that the authorities would come and take us away and we would lose control. So then when I turned 11, my 2 older sisters told me that they were going to move out. I'm just saying that metaphorically because we really didn't have a place to move out of because we never really had a home, but they were going to leave the home, which was a very normal thing to do. Because when kids grow, and they were 14 and 15 at the time, because when children grow up in such dire circumstances, the burden is always on the older ones. And the older ones are just counting down the days until they could finally leave. And that's what they were doing. They wanted to just go be teenagers for the first time in their life. And they said to me that they've spent their entire life raising me and my 2 younger siblings, and now it's my turn to take care of that. And I accepted it, because that is what culturally, when you live in this type of environment, happens and you expect it. So they moved out and they decided to stay with a friend of theirs. And here I was at the age of 11, the one who was really responsible now for Rosie and Norman, for the intermittent time. My mother would come in and out. But so I did what I could. And it lasted until I was right before I was 14. And it was tough dealing with it by myself. I mean, Sherry and Camille would try to help us out. My mother would be nearby, but I still had the primary responsibility to do what I could to take care of them on my own and make sure nobody knew. So what ultimately happened is what little food that we had, I would give to them because I didn't want to have them not eat anything. So they would get the food, and I realized for some strange reason that vinegar suppressed my appetite. So I would constantly be asked, when people ask me, well, what could they drop off? I would always put on the list vinegar. And I would say that I used it for cleaning, but what I really did was use it to suppress my appetite. And the other thing, because my mother was a drug addict, she had pills around that were called uppers and downers at the time. And I knew the difference between them, so I started taking them because at least they gave me energy to get through the day. So there I was, I remember looking at myself in the mirror at 13 years old, and I was so surprised at what I saw because I was so malnutritioned. My skin looked different because of the lack of nutrients that were going in. It looked a little discolored. You could see my ribs and my knees. I mean, I was just a bag of bones with just skin right over me. I had patches of bald spots on my head, because when a child suffers from malnutrition, they start losing their hair, and then I had some gray hair as well because of the stress that I was under at a young age. But I was still doing what I possibly could to hide the situation that we were in. And then my mother came home from one of her drunken binges. I got a beating that I wasn't able to hide. I went to school the next day. My teacher saw that I wasn't able to hide it, figured out what was going on, called social services. When I got off the bus that November day in 1980, I saw that there was a car in my driveway that I recognized because the fleet of cars that social services has were all the same. There were four-door gray cars. And the social worker was there. And she demanded to know what was going on. Now, meanwhile, it's been years since we've been back in the foster system, and because we've done our best to live in these communities and just basically stay under the radar screen. And she looked at me and she basically said, Regina, if you don't tell me what's going on, you're not going to survive, and neither's your two younger siblings. You have to tell me. You have to let us help you. So finally, I broke down. But before I broke down, I made a deal with her, because I didn't want to tell her. And she said, well, you're going to be 14 years old in a few days. And when you reach the age of 14 in the state of New York, you can emancipate yourself from your mother. So you'll be able to emancipate yourself from your mother and make your own decisions about where you want to live. But I need your help to do that. And I said, well, what about Rosie and Norman? And she said, well, we can take this information that you're going to give me, and we could ask the judge to take your mother's parental rights away from them. And it sounded good. I knew that they would ultimately could be freed for adoption and someone else would adopt them, but at least they'd have a better life than the life that we had. So I caved and I told her everything that was going on. The next day I went to school, and when I came back, I saw something in the driveway that is a child's worst fear when that child grows up in the foster care system. I saw 2 cars in the driveway. I was put in one car with my older sister, Camille, and my 2 younger siblings, Rosie and Norman, were put in the other car, and we were taken to separate foster homes. So when we were placed in the foster home, Camille and I started working on my emancipation papers. We submitted them to the judge, and it is basically a chronology of everything that happened to us. And a few weeks later, my mother found out what was going on, and what we were trying to do, and we were trying to take her rights away from them. But it wasn't as if she really cared. They were basically a welfare check, because she had 5 kids, 5 welfare checks. And she was going to lose the last opportunity she would ever have 2 welfare checks, because the 3 older girls were now gone. She knew that she lost us forever. So she went and she started visiting them, and then on one visit she never took them back. And she basically made her way to Idaho. So this day and age, when a parent goes to a foster home and legally takes their child out and takes them across state lines, it's called kidnapping, and you would have an Amber Alert nationwide. Back then, it wasn't treated that way. It was just treated as 1 less child or 2 less children in the system. So what Etch and Sand shows you is the story about how these young kids kind of grew up on the fringe of society, how we really just through our bonds did our best to try to stay together, how we were tenacious, how we persevered, we were optimists essentially, but it also shows you the challenges of the system back then, some of which remain today, some of which have changed. So ultimately what happened is I ended up staying in this one foster home that I was placed in when I was 14, and what you see from Etch and Sand is as I was staying there and I was trying to figure out how to mainstream and how to keep my head above water, my sisters and I were trying to fight to get Rosie and Norman back and trying to protect them, but the state of New York refused to talk to the state of Idaho, and vice versa. So here we were, these 3 teenage girls who raised our younger siblings, and because of who we were, because we were marginalized, because we were impoverished, we didn't have a voice. No one was there representing us. So we had to figure out how it was we were going to protect them, and the reality is we couldn't because no one paid attention to us because we were these poor kids who were foster kids. So ultimately what happened is I stayed in this one foster home. And my caseworker would tell me that I had to plan on being homeless at the age of 18. Because what happens in the US when foster kids age out of foster care at 18 or 21, depending on what state that they're in, they age out to nobody but themselves. And so I was going to age out at the age of 18 to no one. So I had to figure out how I was going to live on my own. And she said my goal was to make sure I wasn't going to end up homeless. Can you imagine being a 14-year-old and being told that? That we've got to make sure that when you turn 18, you're not going to be homeless because you don't have a family. So while she was telling me this and trying to give me independent living training, I was going to a high school. And I started bonding with these amazing teachers, and I was in this high school for a few years, and they told me that I should go to college. And they were doing everything they can to kind of put me on that path. And they would sign me up for the ACT and the SAT, simple things like that that a parent does for a child that is not usually done, or often done for a foster child. They told me what days I should go take the test. They put me in every AP class they could possibly think of, thinking it would be less expensive for me once I go to college. And they were really protecting me and corralling me, there's certain teachers in this high school community. And then I'd go and I'd meet with my caseworker, who was telling me I was going to be homeless at the age of 18, and I said, well, I'm not going to be homeless, I'm going to go to college. And she said, no, you're not, Regina. I said, what do you mean? Yes, I'm going to college. My teachers have told me I'm going to go to college. And she said, no, because foster kids don't go to college. And you know what? She was right. Today, there are over 400,000 kids in the U.S. in foster care at any given time. But generally, less than 2% of the foster care population actually get college degrees. Today, back then, they weren't even going to college, and she was absolutely right. But I ignored her, and I said I was going to college. She insisted she still needed to give me my independent living training, which was basically a 17-point checklist that had questions on it. And if I answered the question yes, she didn't have to teach me it. And if I answered it no, she was going to teach me it. And that was going to be my preparation to live on my own at the age of 18. So one question was, well, do you know how to pay rent? Because you have to get an apartment and pay rent. And I said, no, I haven't done that yet, so you're going to have to teach me how to do that. The second question was, well, do you know how to open a bank account? And by that point, I was working, I was raking leaves, I was babysitting, and I said, I actually have a bank account and I have money in there. She's like, okay, check. And then she said, well, when you get this apartment, you're going to have to put the power on. Do you know how to call the power company to put the power on? And I said, well, I've answered the phone enough times when the power company has called to shut the power off. I'm pretty sure I could figure it out the other way. Check. And then she said, well, you know, when you're on your own, you're going to have to figure out how to get food. Do you know how to go food shopping? And I thought, with or without money? So these were the questions that were given to me to prepare me to live on my own at the age of 18. But I chose not to listen to her. And I chose to listen to my high school teachers. And that's what part of Hesston Sand is the impact that so many people had on my life, even though I was a transient child and I wasn't going to be in their world all too long, and how they had encouraged me. And that's what Hesston Sand shows you. So I graduated high school. I started at a large university, which did not work out for me. Because as a child that didn't have a foundation, didn't have parents, didn't have an infrastructure, going to a large university setting wasn't any more helpful either. So I wasn't doing well there. And I decided to transfer away after 3 semesters there to State University at New Paltz, which is north of Manhattan, about 2 hours. And I decided to transfer there for a few reasons. I mean, one, they had an education major, and I think every woman who grew up on Long Island at that time loved the beaches, and the thought of actually having summers off and being able to go to the beach was great. 2, I got to go away, so I got to remove myself from my foster home now and live a little bit more independently. And the third reason, which is the most important reason, is that 7 of my high school friends were going to New Paltz. Now, many of you who have children, if they ever told you they wanted to transfer to a college because 7 of their high school friends are going, you would make sure that they weren't going to go to that college. But for me, think about what it was. It was my infrastructure. I had a safety net. I was going to go someplace where I was going to have my own community built in already. So away I transferred. So when I was when I first was going to a large university, I was working and going there. And when I went away to New Paltz, I had to work a few jobs at once. And between work study and waitressing and working at a farm stand on the weekend, and it was dark and it was really, really tough because I had to manage that and I had to try to get my GPA up and think about like graduating college. Even though I didn't know what I was going to do afterwards, I didn't really have a goal. I just, in my mind, was convinced that like I had to graduate college. That was going to be my anti-poverty degree. I'll be able to figure it out afterwards. But I didn't have a plan. So the first semester I was there, I was taking all these education classes, and I had to take a class to fulfill a history requirement for my education major. And the only class that fit into that time I had was a class on international politics at 8 in the morning that I took accidentally. Because no 19-year-old in their right mind takes an 8 a.m. class on international politics. So I was sitting there in the class with my head down with all my other peers after my professor asked who here was registered to vote. We were all 19, we could have been registered to vote, and not one hand went up. And then he wanted to know who there had actually listened to a presidential State of the Union address. Again, no hand went up. And who here reads the New York Times? And no hand went up. So I thought this class was going to be a complete disaster. But I stuck with it, and I'm so grateful that I did. Because besides scaring us at the beginning, which, based on the grades he gives out, he was true to form, this is what I learned. I mean, I was sitting in this class, and he started teaching us about the Middle East, about the conflicts that were going on back then, how people lived in certain countries, and I started learning how women are treated in some Middle Eastern countries. And then he taught us about Haiti and the Philippines, and how the people in those countries were really suffering under the dictatorship of Baby Doc Duvalier and the Marcos regime. And then he taught us about Africa. And forget about a healthcare system. People couldn't even get water in certain countries. And little girls would wake up and have to walk by themselves 2 miles in the morning to go to a well to bring back a bucket to get their family water. And I was sitting here in this classroom, and for the very first time in my life, I actually felt lucky. Because here I was, a 19-year-old kid who grew up homeless and in foster care, and I'm getting a college degree. And I felt fortunate that my siblings and I were born into our situation here. Because it was in that classroom that I realized that if we were born into our situation in any of those other countries, we would have been sold into the child sex slave, we would have become child warriors, we wouldn't have had a mother who cared to feed us, and we wouldn't survive because of a lack of a healthcare system or even lack of water. But I was here getting my college degree. So it was that particular class that started me thinking that maybe I can come up with another plan of in my life afterwards. I didn't yet think about what it was, but I did change my major that semester to political science. And then I started learning from my other professors what the definition of politics is. The real definition of politics for political scientists is that politics is the allocation of resources. Think about it. Politics, whoever's running politics, gets to allocate the resources. That's what it is. That's why people fight so hard to become president and governor, county executive and mayor. They want to try to be controlling the resources. So then I thought, well, who are these people? And how have they got themselves in a position where they can make decisions about what kind of resources my sibling and I had available, or who protected us, or what kind of foster parents we would get? And it was at this time that I also thought, one day maybe I want to be the one controlling some of those resources, because I know what it's like not to get them, and I know maybe a better way to help people with them. So it was another one of these drops along the way. So Etch and Sand shows you this story through my eyes about how it is I went from complete poverty. I managed to graduate college. Later on, I went to law school. I put myself to law school at nighttime while I worked during the day. I went on to become a partner in a law firm, and I was there for a long time, and I was very happily working there until I actually got a call from a friend of mine who ran for county executive in Suffolk County, which is the county I grew up in. And Suffolk County is larger than 12 U.S. states by way of a few factors. It has 1.5 million residents, a $2.7 billion budget, and a workforce of 9,500 people. That's a lot for one county. So he won, and he got to run the county. And he called me up and he said, I need a chief deputy. Do you want to be my chief deputy? And I said, get out of here. You want me to help run the county that I grew up as a homeless kid? This is fantastic. So I joined him, and I was his chief deputy. Now, when you get a job, you think you know what you're doing, you transition in. The reality is you really don't know what you get until you're there. So I was transitioning in and studying in, but this was like a mega operation to run. So the first 2 weeks, I was happy. I knew how to put the lights on, I knew where the bathroom was, and I knew how to put the computer on. So I was doing great. And then a colleague of mine put a copy of the Long Island newspaper on my desk and said, read the story. And it was a story of an Intel Science semifinalist. And because, sure, every community has your Intel Science semifinalists, and lots of stories written about them. They're high achievers for high school students. It's very impressive. But this particular story was highlighting this young woman named Samantha Garvey, and she was on the front page of Newsday, which is a Long Island newspaper. And I read the story, and the interesting thing about Samantha, the reason why she was being featured, is because she was living in a homeless shelter with her parents and her 2 younger siblings who were twins. And the story was about, she knew that the only way out of poverty was education, and she had to study really hard to show her younger siblings a way out of poverty. And I was reading this, and I realized, this is in Suffolk County. This kid's living in a homeless shelter. Guess who's in charge of the resources? So I called a few of our commissioners together on the phone that were there. They were holdovers from a prior administration, thank goodness, because they at least knew what was happening. And we went through, what can we possibly do? And they said, we only have 5 houses as a county that we can let families live in that where the rent will be subsidized. It's called subsidized housing. And I said, well, do we have any available? They said, no, 4 of them families are living in, and 1 has been destroyed because a prior tenant who was getting evicted was upset and destroyed the house. And I was like, that's great, we got a house. And they said, no, the house is destroyed. I said, is there a wait list for the house? They said, no, it's destroyed. I said, well, what do you mean destroyed? He said, they tore apart the inside. I said, she's living in a homeless shelter. The kid is living in a homeless shelter. And they said, well, the house it's a mess. We don't know if we'll be able to renovate it. And I said, you don't have to renovate it to a level that you would renovate your own home. She's living in a homeless shelter. What can we do to renovate this home? And then they realized we could actually do this. So we put together a plan. My boss went out the very next day, had a press conference, announced, this is just this local story, announced that Samantha was going to get a home within 2 weeks because we realized we could actually renovate this home in 2 weeks. After the press conference, everyone literally came out of the woodwork, all puns intended, and they wanted to contribute everything to this house. They wanted to contribute floors and a roof and tiles for the bathroom and furniture from Marriott Hotel, and I mean all of this. So their house was going to be furnished as well, which was phenomenal because people were really responding to the story. And after the story hit, it went worldwide. So Samantha was flown to the White House, where she was invited there to the President's State of the Union. Then she was invited on the Ellen DeGeneres show. She got a $50,000 scholarship to college. She was flown back. We handed her the keys to the house 2 weeks later, and I thought, that's it. If I ever do anything else in this job, because it's a big job, you got to run an operation. You're not like getting people's houses every day. I mean, but if nothing ever happens and I still have to run, this big operation day to day, it can't get any better than this. Like, I was put in this situation at this time to help this young woman based upon what my experiences are. And I was so satisfied just knowing that I had that one opportunity to be able to do that when I was somewhat in control of some of the resources. But I was wrong, because 10 months later, our county was hit by Sandy, Superstorm Sandy. And we were affected by death and devastation. We lost lives. And we had entire communities that were devastated and hundreds of families that were homeless. And then it was my responsibility to try to find these families that are now homeless homes. It's that great irony of it. And that's what Etched in Sand is about. It's about this child that lives on the fringe of society, happens to pull herself up based upon the resources there, based upon so many acts of kindness. And it just shares our story of optimism and tenacity and perseverance, But it also shares with the reader the fact that we all made a decision, we made a choice. We knew what we didn't want, and we didn't want to continue the cycles. So it also shows you that in one generation, my siblings and I, how we broke the cycle of drug and alcohol addiction, abuse, incarceration, homelessness. All that is gone. And we did it because we made that choice. So why did I write the book? After my entire life, barely sharing any of it with anyone I knew. I wrote it for two reasons. One is because I'm a board member of an organization called You Gotta Believe, where we work to get older foster kids adopted. Because what that caseworker also told me when I was 14, and when she told me I was going to be homeless, and I said, well, I'm freed for adoption now, won't someone want to adopt me? And she said, no, people don't adopt foster kids, especially older foster kids. So at that point, at the age of 14, I knew for the rest of my life I would never have a parent. So I heard about this fabulous organization called You Gotta Believe that works to get older foster kids adopted. I didn't believe that there was any type of group that was out there. And I joined them, I think I started joining them about 2005, 2006. And with all the work that we do, we're not going to get all the kids adopted because in the US there are over 400,000 kids in foster homes and 26,000 of them age out every single year to nobody but themselves at the ages of 18 or 21. And because they age out with very little resources, they end up homeless or incarcerated. And that's why half of the homeless population in the US are former foster children, and a third of the incarcerated population are former foster children. So I know through You Gotta Believe that we're not going to get them all adopted. It's impossible for us to do it. So I wanted to write my story for them and show them, not only them, but the millions of kids out there in the US who are abused, who are neglected, and those of them that are just really challenged and they're constantly asking themselves why it is that they're dealt the hand that they were dealt. Because we would all the time. I would say, how come I was born into this situation and have that as a mother, as opposed to some of these very warm and loving homes that I was in? I mean, you ask yourself that as a child going through the situation. So I wrote it for them to tell them that yes, you were dealt a bad hand. Many of us are dealt bad hands. But be grateful that you're dealt that hand here in the US. Because if you believe in yourself and you have self-determination and you keep that light burning brightly, you will be able to pull yourself up and out because there are enough resources here. You just have to figure out how to harness them. And I wrote it to show them that it's not easy. It's going to take a long time for you to do it because especially if you don't have a parent or a safety net to fall back on, it will take a lot longer for you to achieve it. But the resources are there, so don't give up. And I try to give them messages in the book. One time, I remember, sometimes they're very dark because I was working several jobs at once and I wondered, what do I have to prove? Why am I doing this? Why am I going to college? What's the point of this? Is it for myself? And what's the end game to it? But I knew I just still had to do it. I just wouldn't give up on it, even though I didn't know what it was I was going to do or where I was going to live after I graduated. So I made a promise to myself, and I talk about this in Etched in Sand, that I would wake up every morning and I'd make a promise that I'd put one foot in front of another and walk up the hill to classes and go to all the classes and do everything I possibly needed to do to get through that day. By the end of the day, I would be one day closer to my goal. So sometimes you just have to take it a day at a time. The other message I shared with them is that you don't have to plan really big, grandiose goals. When you're doing so much of this yourself and you're carrying the weight and carrying the burden, you don't have to think about going to medical school or being a lawyer or doing something that is so unattainable sometimes when you have no resources. Make mini goals. I never knew what I wanted to do. I just knew I had to graduate college. I had to figure out how it was I was going to graduate college. And along the way, my light was lit again by college professors that kind of put me on the path to public policy. But making mini goals is key when you're struggling because it's not going to be too overwhelming. You just reach that goal, and then you figure out what the next goal is. So that's the first reason why I wrote the book, is just to remind kids out there who are struggling that you can do it. It's going to take a lot longer. Just breathe, get through the day, make mini goals, and eventually one day you're going to look around and you're going to realize that the only thing you have to do for the rest of your life is work one job. And I ultimately achieved that by the age of 30, which I thought my God, it's like over. I just have to go to work. One job. How easy is that? Think about that. It's been a piece of cake compared to what it was that I went through. The second reason why I wrote the book is because of all of you. If you think about my story, I really didn't have an adult in my life for a long time. I had many adults for moments in time that I was before them, that they made a difference. And I share in my story things I refer to as good touches and bad touches. I talk about adults in my book who are horrible to me, but I changed their names because it wasn't about calling them out. It was just to show the reader the impact that someone could have on a child based upon what they say or how they treat them. Those are the bad touches. But I needed to show the readers that this is what happens to kids who live on the fringe of society. But those who treated me kindly as I was growing up in this situation, their names go in the book because they deserve to be recognized. And I was fortunate in my life that I had more good touches in my life than I had bad touches. So when it was my time to make a decision about what path I was going to go down, I was convinced that everything that all these good touches said about me or did for me was true. So I'm going to go down this path. But the path was created for me by these strangers for this moment in time I was before them. I mean, one of them, when you're a foster child and you go from place to place to place, you go there with a garbage bag that have your clothes in them. And every caseworker thinks that's all you need. You don't need things, you just need your clothes. But we need the things. We don't have a history. Every time we go to a new home, we're losing our history. We're losing our connections to our past. So kids need these things to hold on to. So I had 4 things in my bag. I had baby Jesuses. I had no idea until chapter 10 in the book, as you know, where I got these baby Jesuses from. But I held on to them, and I wanted to carry them every place I went. Because even though I didn't know where I got them from, I know whoever gave them to me loved me. I was loved in the home where I got these baby Jesuses. The other thing I carried in my bag was a picture of my siblings of I, the 5 of us, that was taken right after Rosie was born. The only other picture now we had in our possession of the 5 of us for years was that particular picture. But that was my connection. I needed to hold on to my siblings. The last item I walked around with for years and still have it today is my 5th grade autograph book. By the time I was in the 5th grade and went back to St. James Elementary School, a lot of terrible things had happened to me and I felt really dirty. But I had a teacher who kept telling me how pretty I was and that I was talented and that I was smart. And I have to stay in school. And the only way out of my situation is to read and to stay in school. And she learned I was a really good speller, so she would have weekly spelling bees, and that I would win. And the prize for winning was a ring ding or a Twinkie. So I was convinced that the only reason why she was having the spelling bees is so she could feed me once a week. And then at the end of the school year, she wrote amazing things in my autograph book. Everything she would tell me during the year, she wrote in that little autograph book. So I carried this book around. And when people said terrible things about me, I'd go back in my 5th grade autograph book and look what Ms. Vandover wrote about me. And I thought, she's right. Ms. Vandover's right. And it helped me start blocking out that noise. Other things besides teachers who did everything they possibly could for the teachers that were good to encourage me when I was before them. I had librarians that were kind. I had a crossing guard that would pack me lunch, on a Friday, knowing that I wasn't going to eat anything over the weekend, and on my way home, she'd hand me a little bag lunch. And then even though I had parents of friends tell their kids to stay away from me, I actually had so many more that would realize I was playing with their child and invite me home. And I would get my clothes washed. And they would give me a bath sometimes, try to teach me how to blow my nose, maybe give me a toothbrush. Of course, I was always fed. But the most important thing I learned while being in their home, my takeaway, was what a healthy home environment was. Right? If I'm a child growing up on the fringe of society, I have teachers encouraging me, I have librarians, I have crossing guards making sure I'm not hit by a bus, but no one's teaching me what a healthy home environment was. And it was just taught just by parents inviting me into their home and me seeing how other people live. So that's the second reason why I wrote the book, is to remind people of the power they have for that moment in time when a child in need is before you. You will make a difference. You may never know how they turn out, but that's okay. Just hope that the next place that this child goes, that they're going to find another kind adult like you. and that they're going to get through life with these collective good touches. And amazingly, that's why the second reason why I wrote the book wasn't the primary reason, but that's the reason why the book has taken off incredibly. And when it first came out in 2013, it hit the New York Times bestseller list for a few weeks. I thought that was great. You know, there's a lot of press around it, and people like these kind of stories. And so because of the media around it, people went out and bought it. So it hit the New York Times bestseller list for 2 weeks. And then it dropped off the list. And I was okay with that because, you know, my goal was to make sure it wasn't going to be on the worst seller list. Check, right? And then the book was just plugging along. And months later, because the book came out in August, I started seeing all this energy around it, and people were contacting me, and they were telling me what they were doing in response to Etched in Sand. And they contacted me on my 2 Facebook pages, which is easy. I have a Facebook author page and another page, and a regular page, and a website. And it's very easy to find me, because there are 2 Regina Calcaterras in the world. One is blonde, 30s, living in Argentina, and then there's mine. So people easily find ways to contact me. So I was getting all these messages through, you know, social media about how people were responding to the book. And I saw, and they said they were buying the book, they were telling people around it, and just surprisingly in April, it went back on the New York Times bestseller list and stayed on the list for 16 weeks and rose to number 2, right behind Maya Angelou, right after she passed. And it got there not because of press, but because of word of mouth. Because people were reading the messages in this book and they were sharing it with others. And it just kept going and going nationwide. It's been absolutely incredible. And that has been the momentum behind it. And then when people were contacting me, they were telling me what they're doing. People are doing things. They're still doing things here in this community too, in response to it. I've had caseworkers contact me around the world and say, I don't know if I'm ever really going to make a difference in these kids' lives, so I keep questioning why I'm doing the job I'm doing. And they said after reading my book, they realized that they still have to get up the next day and they still have to do their job, because if they don't do it, there may be a kid that they're not touching. I've had educators nationwide contact me, educators between principals or administrators or teachers or professors, say, you reminded us. The one thing we always question when transient kids come in and out of our school and we don't see them for another week or we just won't see them anymore, we question whether or not they're a lost cause. You reminded us by writing Etched in Sand that no child is a lost cause. And then I had people just doing things. I know Casa is here tonight. Can I see hands of Casa? Is Casa here? All right, I'm supporting Casa. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Right over there. CASA is a group called Court Appointed Special Advocates. People read Etched in Sand and realized the one thing that we never had our entire youth was a voice. We didn't have anyone who represented us. And what CASA is, it's a group of volunteers who are trained to work, and they're assigned to a foster kid, and they get to know this foster kid as much as possible. And when this child has to go to court, it's not the parent's attorney that represents a child. It's not the county's attorney that represents a child. It's the CASA representative that represents a child, because they're the only ones acting in the child's best interest, and judges listen to them. So people have read my book and they've drawn CASA. So CASA contacts me once in a while and say, thanks for boosting our membership. Other things, I had a food bank on Long Island that after they read my book, and this food bank has been around for 31 years, and this woman who's been running it has been running it for the past 5 years, and she contacted me and she said, I can't believe what we've done. We have a rule at this food bank and many other food banks that if a child goes into a food bank and they're not accompanied by a parent or they don't have a permission slip, we won't give them the food they ask for. From an administrative perspective, you understand why they may have that rule, but after they've read my book, they're realizing, oh my goodness, we've been turning away kids. So many kids who come in here and ask for food, and we never realized that maybe there's just not a parent home. So they changed their rules that if any child comes in, even if this child comes in and asks for food for a family of 5, they're giving them the food and letting them go on their way. And they told other food banks the same thing, and they have changed their procedures as well. Then people have actually gone out and adopted older foster kids. I got a note from someone who adopted a 17-year-old, after I spoke somewhere, adopted and read my book, adopted a 17-and-a-half-year-old boy. And she became certified, and adopted him 6 months before he's going to age out to no one else. He now has a forever home and a forever parent. I spoke at a library a year ago, October, and there's a gentleman in the audience who heard me speaking. He went home and told his wife, because their son was college age now, and said, I want to adopt a foster daughter. They welcomed into their home a 16-year-old daughter that they're in the midst of adopting. She's 2 years before she's going to age out. So it's amazing for me, for my siblings and I, to be able to write this story the way that we have written it and shared it in a way that it's having this impact, because we never imagined it. So I'm just going to leave you with just one more anecdote, and then I'll open it up to Q&A. I think one of the most impactful things happened to me because it was so simple. And so I was at a book club that had a lot of people there because they all read the book, and there were lots of questions. And people like to ask about good touches, because they like to, they start, when they hear this, they start thinking about their past behaviors. What have they done in the past? Did they act correctly? Did they encourage a child? Did they discourage a child? And then they start thinking about how they're going to see these kids differently, because you could look at them, you just may not see them. So we had a long discussion on it that night. And so after everyone left, I was now leaving, and the husband of the homeowner came over to me, and he was crying. And everyone there read the book except for him and his 16-year-old son. And he said, he wanted to wait till he stopped crying before he spoke to me, and his wife encouraged him to maybe hold on. But he chose not to. He said he wanted to tell me what he's done. And tears were coming down his face. And he said, I can't believe what I've done. And they lived in a nice, very nice community. And there is a home nearby where the parents are drug and alcohol addicted, and they don't maintain their home, and they have a 16-year-old son. And he told me, I have told my son to stay away from that boy. In fact, everyone in this community has told their children to stay away from him. He said, because we thought he was going to end up like his parents. We didn't want our kids around him. But I didn't realize that we were actually pushing him that way by not opening up our hearts, not opening up our homes, not being kind to him, not inviting him on our sports team, not offering to pay for sports equipment. He started listing down, because he must have been thinking there the whole time, everything that they could have done to help take care of this young man that they didn't do. And I left that night with him telling me that he was going to, engage the young man the next day, and then he was going to engage everyone else in their community and tell them what they've been doing wrong and try to get them on board with helping them. And he said, if they don't believe me, I'm going to have them read your book. I said, can you do that anyway? Anyway, so Etch and Sand has been an absolute gift for me to take something that could be a tragic story and actually share it in a way that has positively impacted so many. So thank you so much for reading it. Thank you for having it as part of your community, taking our story and just having everyone absorb it here and respond to it in such a positive way that you're giving back as well, because you read Etch and Sand, and as a community that you came together supporting it. So thank you. Now I'm going to open it up to Q&A.
Thank you very much, Regina, for sharing your story, your inspiring story, both in the book and with us here tonight. So we have three FYE scholars, Luis, Daisy, and Germany, who have microphones. And if you have a question for Regina, feel free to raise your hand, and they will bring it to you.
Can you tell us a little more about what happened to Norman?
Yes, Norman and Rosie ended up going to Idaho, and then he stayed in Idaho for a while, and then after my mother died, we moved him back to Pennsylvania. That's where my sister Sherry is, and so he's been living there. He's now a welder. My nephews are there, and so he has a family there as well.
Can you tell us more of what kind of emotions went through your brain and what your initial reactions were while you were being abused? In your book, it seemed like to me that you suppressed some of your initial reflexes, maybe, while you were being abused. What were the thoughts and reflexes that were going through your brain?
I shared with readers that I learned to count. So anytime something was happening to me, whether I was being hung in the closet or tied up or abused, I just try to count my way through it. So psychologically, I worked my way through the pain that I was experiencing. So I would not only count, but I would think of beaches, I would think of playing on the beach, I would think of puppies. I mean, little things that you may want to think of if you're in the dentist and you're uncomfortable and don't want to wince too much, so you try to have happy thoughts. I learned at a young age to start thinking about those different thoughts. So I would be less present at the moment, so I wouldn't necessarily take in all the pain that was happening because I was trying to mentally push it out. And it's a coping mechanism, and I think any human being who goes through that and that is abused in some way figures out a coping mechanisms in order to get through those episodes.
What kind of stuff were you trying to do? Like, what was the reflexes that you were coping with, or what you were trying to cover?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
What were the things that you were coping with, or what was the things that you were trying to push out besides the pain of the abuse? Were there any kind of responses that you were having?
It depended on my age. I mean, when I was earlier, I was trying to understand why my mother was doing this to me. And as I became older, I realized that our relationship was more transactional. So it wasn't anything else that I was just pushing out. I had no more emotion left and no more emotional connection to her. I would just try to push out the what was happening at the moment and just ignore it psychologically. Thank you.
Obviously we know the whole book is about your mom and the neglect towards you, but is there any positives, like memories of your mom?
Oh, that there any positive attributes of my mother? Yes. She gave me the best gift of all, and the best gift is my 4 siblings. So she brought the 5 of us into this world, and I wouldn't want that to be any different.
Did you ever reconnect with Susan and her parents from the bubble house?
Oh, I wish I did. I didn't. I wish I did. I was hoping one day, because I haven't been able to find them, and I was hoping that they'd read the book and maybe realize it was them. But that hasn't happened. That happened with many others that have reconnected with a lot of teachers as well, and a lot of old friends that didn't necessarily know. But I would have loved to see Nancy and Frank again. Remember those words? I think I was like in the 3rd grade, and I was learning to, fight. No, they introduced me to Sugar Ray Leonard. And I was hoping that Susan and her family would read the book and realize I wrote about them as well, but they didn't.
What do your nieces and nephews know about your mom?
Well, they know a lot now. My nieces and nephews right now, the wonderful thing about my siblings is, we not only broke the cycle together, but they brought in the next generation of our family that will never be subjected to anything that we were subjected to. And so with my 4 siblings, I have 12 nieces and nephews, and now I have a great nephew as well. And they knew a little bit, but they didn't know, they didn't know much of it really until they read the book. And I think Camille was the happiest, even though when I wrote it, and I'm saying this facetiously, because her kids, once in a while, when they would get mad at her, would always say that she's such a bad mom. And she'd call me up and she's like, "Can you believe that they think I'm a bad mom?" And we would laugh, because they had, they didn't have the perspective that we had on it. And so now they know a lot more, and it wasn't necessarily, for my nieces and nephews to learn about my mother wasn't all that important. I think what was important for us is to show them how blessed they are, and they are. My siblings have raised compassionate and caring children that are given back through church and charity, and they have realized how fortunate they are to be born to their parents as well.
You talk about in the book about how for years, even after you had already told your social worker about all of the abuse that had happened and signed the affidavit, you talk about how even for years after that, you had beat yourself up about breaking that pact to keep the secret. And I guess my question is, now looking back, do you think you made the right decision, and why?
No, I don't. Breaking the pact put my younger siblings in great danger, and where we weren't around to protect them, and they were basically on their own. And the one thing, there's many things you can contribute to each one of us being able to pull ourselves up and out, but I'm pretty convinced that one of the things that helped me is that I had my siblings around, and even though things would get tough with each one of us individually or collectively, we were too busy making sure each other's heads were kept above water than deal with our own darkness. So being a sibling group was really healthy for us in this situation because we kind of pushed each other forward because of what I shared that forever impacted Rosie and Norman when they didn't have us protecting us. So I know from a logical perspective, it saved me, but it hurt them. So that's something that I would go back and change if I would be able to do that.
Did you ever forgive your the foster family that put you in sleeping bags 24/7?
I'm sorry, where's the question coming from?
Did you ever forget the foster family that left you in sleeping bags 24/7?
Did I forgive them or forget them?
Forgive them.
No. No, it was pretty horrible what happened, and sometimes I didn't think about them. So I don't even think about them to forgive them. And that's a way sometimes that you cope.
I wonder, Camille and Sherry left whenever you were 11 and you had to deal with taking care of their siblings. Now that you're older, did you forgive them for that? Do you have more perspective on it?
Oh my goodness, I never held it against them.
Never?
No, you don't, because culturally, when kids grow up on the street, there is an expectation that at a certain age, they're going to leave their environment. They're street kids. They know at a certain age that they could run away and the authorities aren't going to look for them anymore. So that was to be expected. I was not, I was upset at the time when Camille left, but that's nothing I would ever hold against them because culturally that's what we did. That's what street kids do. They leave at a certain age and then the next in line ends up taking care of the younger siblings. So, I would have left at one point, then Norman would have been the one taking, care of Rosie. That's how it happens when you don't have a parent around sometimes.
After you had legal confirmation that John was your father, did he ever quit denying and try to reach out to you or establish somewhat of a relationship?
Were you asking if my father reached out to me after the litigation?
Correct.
Yes, actually he did. I met him, I met him in December 2011, I believe it was. Or 2012. No, it could have been December 2011. He wanted to meet. I have a sister. He has a daughter who is my sister. Her name is Barbara Ann. And he finally told her about her that I existed when she was 53. So, she has two amazing daughters, so they did research and they found me. And I've been able to form a lovely relationship with them. When he realized that we formed a relationship, he said he wanted to meet me. I was hesitant, but Camille encouraged me because she said that if you don't do this, you're always going to regret it. So just give yourself that one chance. But what I wanted to make sure what I did was kind of control the meeting. And, at a certain setting, certain things can be asked, certain things it couldn't be asked. Just so at least we can just at least get through our first meeting. And we met, and it was fine. And that was the last time I ever met him. But it was good enough for me because I did get that one opportunity to actually meet him.
So did he apologize for putting you all through all of that?
He apologized. He did. And I was grateful for his apology.
When you and your sisters went to take Rosie away from your mother, why didn't you bring Norman along?
My mother, and I indicate this in the book, is that she wasn't abusing him. What he was subjected to was not like what the girls were ever subjected to. And he was okay there, and Rosie was more at risk. And I didn't share really what happened to Rosie, but you will be learning about it if you have an opportunity to read my next book, which comes out a year from October, which is Rosie's story. Because when I wrote my story, I didn't want to write their story. I mean, there are characters in my book, but I didn't really have the right to be sharing their story. It's their story to tell. And Rosie's is so complex that there are tidbits in there about her, but until you learn what was going on with her, then you will understand why it was so important at least to kind of extricate her out of that situation at the time.
Let's maybe take 2 more questions. I know there's one over here.
I myself, I emancipated out of the foster care system, and one thing that I always had as a question going through some abusive foster homes was, what should I do? A lot of other foster children, they ran away or left, and for whatever reason, I just stayed and went through it. So what would you say to a foster child that's going through that? What should they do in those situations? Because the department will listen to them and different things. What do you see as the best thing they can do?
Are you saying if you're in an abusive foster home or a neglectful one?
Either or both.
Okay. The reality, I'd like to suggest to you that you should call social services and see if they can have you removed to another place. But the reality is that the next place may not be better. You may be in a better situation where you are. So, not to go into details, but there were times I was in challenging places, and I realized it was better to stay there because I knew at least what I was dealing with, and I could cope and get through it until I went to the next place. So sometimes you have to make that decision if it's a tolerable situation, where it could be, let's say neglectful, that may be more tolerable than being abused. But if you're being abused, you need to get out of there, and you need to call the police, create a record, and but unfortunately, you may not have another place to go to, and I know that that's a risk that you would be taking. I wish I can give you a better answer, but the reality is that sometimes we don't have, sometimes there are fabulous foster homes, but sometimes there aren't. And I know that the older you get, the more challenging it is. That as far as foster parents opening up their homes, because sometimes people would like younger kids and not necessarily older kids. But if you're getting abused, the best thing for you to do, not only for yourself, but also every other future foster child that may be placed in that home, is you have to report them. And do what you can. And don't just keep it to yourself. I mean, if you have educators around you that care for you and other adults that care for you, you would be surprised. They may open up their homes to you if they know what your situation is. And I just chose not to tell anyone, and now I know that there would have been plenty of people to take me in. So I encourage you to do that as well. But I understand why you stayed there, because you make a decision about what your tolerance could be, and you kind of, until you come up with a plan to leave. But you shouldn't be dealing with that if you're subjected to abuse. Okay. Thank you, and thank you for sharing.
Any other questions? One more back there.
When you're talking about the good touches and the bad touches, what should people look for? I mean, when we're looking into our classrooms and into our communities, you said that you hid the abuse. What should we as a community be looking for in characteristics in these kids to say, this kid needs more attention than maybe this other child?
Look at what their habits are. Are they doing things to self-inflict injury on themselves? Scratching, maybe other things. Are they hiding? Are they wearing hoods? Are they keeping their heads down? Do they wear the same clothes several times a week? Are they scratching their heads a lot? Because sometimes when kids, they're pulled by their hair, they get scabs in their heads. I mean, there's ways that you may not be able to see it. But, and those that are the most silent, just see if you can draw them out a bit. And if there's any sign of abuse whatsoever, call the authorities. I'm pretty sure that there's a requirement for you to do that here as there is in New York State, and that's something that you may well be obligated to do as an educator. But you have to do it because even though many times I did not want anyone to call the authorities because of what would happen to me, and you will be questioning what's going to happen to this child, it really is in their best interest. So thank you for asking that. And thank you for everyone who came here tonight, who's contributing so much to the community and giving back, and I really appreciate you reading Etch and Sound.
Thank you,
you.
Regina, once again.
Thank you. This community is absolutely fantastic. Great.
We want to give you an opportunity to head back first so that you can find a spot. And we thank all of you for coming. A reminder that there is the reception across the hallway, and on your bookmark, you will find a letter that indicates the order that you can have your book signed by Regina, if that is something that you would like to do. But thank you again. Find ways to give good touches.